The hallways of Westfield Academy shone under the bright lights, the marble floors reflecting like mirrors. It was past 8 p.m., and most students had left for the day. Eleanor Jackson pushed her cleaning cart slowly down the empty corridor, her footsteps almost silent after years of practice. At 45, the lines on her face told stories of hard work and quiet strength. Eleanor had been cleaning these halls for 15 years now. 15 years of picking up after young people who had everything handed to them from birth. The students at Westfield came from money, real money. Their parents owned companies, ran political campaigns, and lived in houses bigger than Eleanor's entire apartment building. Tonight, like most nights, Eleanor worked alone. She liked the peace. As she mopped the floor outside the main lecture hall, she could hear voices coming from inside. A group of students still hanging around. She tried to work quietly, not wanting to disturb them. But then she heard laughter, followed by her name. "Look, it's Eleanor again," one voice said. "Does she ever go home?" Eleanor kept her eyes on her work. She'd learned long ago not to react. These kids didn't know any better. They didn't know that after her shift ended at midnight, she would slip into the university library with special permission from the night guard, an older man who had seen her studying there for years. They didn't know that under the simple uniform and worn hands was a woman whose mind was sharp as any professor's. "My dad says people like her should be grateful to have jobs at all," another voice said from inside the room. Eleanor's hand tightened around her mop, but her face stayed calm. What these students didn't see was the woman who had once sat at the top of her high school class. The woman who had been accepted to 3 colleges but couldn't go because her mother got sick. The woman who had spent 20 years dreaming about becoming a lawyer. They didn't see the single mother who worked 2 jobs so her daughter could go to college without debt. They didn't know that her daughter Zoe was now in her 3rd year of medical school, calling home every Sunday to tell Eleanor about everything she was learning. As Eleanor emptied trash cans and wiped down tables, she thought about her small apartment across town. On her kitchen table sat textbooks and notebooks, carefully organized. 6 years ago, she had learned about the employee education program at Westfield. It wasn't much, just 1 free class per semester for staff. But it was enough for Eleanor, 1 class at a time, slow and steady. When the hallway cleared, Eleanor pulled out a small notebook from her pocket. She jotted down a few notes about a case she was studying for her constitutional law class. Professor Williams had praised her last paper, saying it showed remarkable insight. Eleanor smiled at the memory. In her class, she wasn't the janitor. She was just another student. Later that night, after finishing the West Wing, Eleanor found a mess in the student lounge. Someone had spilled coffee all over the floor and left it. Next to the spill was a crumpled paper with crude drawings making fun of the cleaning staff. Eleanor sighed, put on her gloves, and cleaned it up. What the students who made this mess would never understand was that Eleanor didn't just clean their school. She was part of it in ways they couldn't imagine. When she walked these halls after dark, she wasn't just looking for trash to collect, she was memorizing legal terms, preparing arguments, dreaming of standing in a courtroom one day. Eleanor finished cleaning the lounge and checked her watch. 3 hours until her shift ended. Then she could change out of her uniform, take out her books, and become a student herself. Until then, she would remain invisible to most, the woman they saw but never really looked at. The woman who emptied their trash cans today and might change their world tomorrow. Eleanor was cleaning the windows in the business building when she first noticed them watching her. 5 students sitting at a table in the courtyard, all wearing expensive clothes with those little symbols that cost extra money. The leader of the group was a tall young man with perfect teeth and styled hair that probably cost more than Eleanor's weekly grocery budget. His name was Brandon Whittaker. His father owned banks, not just worked at them, but owned them. Everyone at Westfield knew who he was. Brandon and his friends called themselves the Elite. They weren't hiding it either. They had actually gotten matching jackets with the words printed on the back. Eleanor tried to mind her own business, focusing on getting the streaks off the glass, but she could feel their eyes on her back. Then came the laughter. "Hey, window lady," Brandon called out. "You missed a spot." Eleanor didn't turn around. She just moved her cloth in slow circles, making sure the window sparkled. "Do you think she can hear us?" One of Brandon's friends stage whispered. Or maybe she doesn't speak English. More laughter. Elena took a deep breath. She had dealt with this kind of thing before. These kids lived in a bubble where people like her existed only to serve them. In their world, the person who cleaned their mess wasn't a real person with dreams and thoughts. The next day, Elena was emptying trash cans in the cafeteria when Brandon and his friends walked in. They looked right at her, then deliberately knocked over a cup of soda. The brown liquid spread across the floor, making a sticky puddle. "Oops," Brandon said with a smile. "Looks like you've got work to do." His friends laughed as they walked away, leaving Eleanor to clean up the mess. The cafeteria worker behind the counter gave Eleanor a sympathetic look. She wasn't the only staff member who had to deal with this kind of behavior. The worst was during finals week. Every study room was occupied, with students cramming for exams. Elena was making her rounds, emptying trash and wiping down surfaces in each room. When she got to room 103, Brandon and his friends were inside. Their books were spread out across the table, but none of them were studying. They were watching videos on their phones and eating chips. Eleanor knocked lightly on the door. "Excuse me," she said. "I need to clean in here." Brandon looked up with a smirk. "We're not done yet," he said, though it was clear they were just hanging out. "I can come back," Eleanor offered. No, Brandon said, standing up. His friends formed a half circle, blocking the doorway. "Actually, while you're here, maybe you can help us with something." Elena waited, saying nothing. "We're studying law," Brandon continued. His eyes glittered with amusement. "Could you explain to us the difference between a tort and a crime? We're really struggling with our law review." His friends snickered. They thought it was hilarious to ask the janitor about complex legal terms. In their minds, she probably hadn't even finished high school. Eleanor looked directly at Brandon. A tort is a civil wrong that causes harm to another party, while a crime is an offense against public law. One seeks compensation, the other punishment. The room went silent. Brandon's smile faltered. The difference matters because torts are handled in civil court with a lower burden of proof, preponderance of evidence rather than beyond reasonable doubt, Eleanor added. She stepped past them and began emptying the trash can. The students exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the reaction they'd expected. "Did you Google that or something?" one of Brandon's friends finally asked. Elena didn't answer. She just continued cleaning, her movements efficient and practiced. Later that week, Eleanor found a note stuck to her cleaning cart. It read, "Service entrance only for the help." She crumpled it up and threw it away without changing her expression, but that night, when she got home to her small apartment, she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by law books and let herself feel the hurt. She wasn't just angry at Brandon and his friends. She was angry at a system that made them think their behavior was acceptable. Eleanor opened her constitutional law textbook. 6 more months, she whispered to herself. Just 6 more months. She had a paper due on equal protection under the law. As she began to write, the faces of Brandon and his friends faded from her mind, replaced by the words of judges and lawmakers who had shaped the country's understanding of equality. The clock struck midnight as Eleanor hung up her cleaning uniform in the small staff locker room. She splashed cold water on her face, smoothed her hair, and changed into a simple blouse and pants. Now came the part of her day she lived for. Eleanor walked through the quiet, empty hallways of Westfield with a different kind of confidence. At night, the massive building belonged to her in a way it never did during the day. The security guard, Mr. Thompson, nodded as she passed. "Hitting the books again tonight, Eleanor?" "Got a big test tomorrow," she replied with a smile. "You'll ace it," he said, giving her a thumbs up. "You always do." The law library was technically closed, but Mr. Thompson had been letting Eleanor study there for years. He'd seen how serious she was, how hard she worked. He'd even started saving interesting newspaper articles about court cases for her. Under the soft glow of the desk lamp, Elena spread out her books and notes. This was her secret world, one that Brandon and his friends could never imagine. For 6 years, she had been taking night classes in the law program, 1 course per semester. Using her employee education benefit and a small inheritance from her mother, she had slowly built up credits toward a degree that most students finished in 3 years. Professor Diane Williams, a tall woman with gray-streaked hair, had become Eleanor's mentor after noticing her exceptional work in her first-year class. Tonight, the professor was working late in her office when she spotted Eleanor in the library. "There you are," Professor Williams said, pulling up a chair. "I wanted to talk to you about your analysis of the 14th Amendment cases." Eleanor looked up from her books. "Was there a problem with it?" "A problem? Eleanor, it was graduate-level work. Your understanding of how the Equal Protection Clause has evolved through case law was more sophisticated than most of my third-year students." Eleanor's face warmed with pride. "Thank you, Professor. Have you thought about what you'll do after graduation? With your grades, you could clerk for a judge, maybe even apply for some of the public interest fellowships." Eleanor sighed. "Just finishing will be accomplishment enough," she said softly. "Who would hire a 45-year-old first-year lawyer, especially one who looks like me?" Professor Williams leaned forward. "You'd be surprised," she said with a knowing smile. "Excellence has a way of making itself known." After the professor left, Eleanor continued studying. Around 2 a.m., she heard someone enter the library. It was a young man with glasses who often studied late. His name was James Chen, an international student who, unlike most of the wealthy students, always greeted Eleanor respectfully when he saw her cleaning. James looked surprised to see her there without her cleaning cart. His eyes fell on the thick law books spread across the table. "Constitutional law?" he asked. "You're studying law?" Eleanor nodded. 6 years now. James sat down across from her. "I'm struggling with my con law assignment," he admitted. "Professor Harmon wants us to analyze how the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Commerce Clause changed during the New Deal era." Eleanor smiled. "The shift started with NLRB v. Jones and Laughlin Steele," she began. For the next hour, she explained the evolution of Commerce Clause jurisprudence while James took notes, his expression changing from confusion to understanding. "You understand this better than I do," he said finally. "Why are you working as a janitor?" The question wasn't asked with mockery or disbelief, just genuine curiosity. "Life doesn't always take us on a straight path, James," she answered, looking at her worn hands, still slightly rough from the cleaning chemicals. "But it can still take us where we need to go." The next morning, Eleanor was back in her uniform, mopping the floors outside the lecture halls. Students rushed past her, barely noticing her presence. Some dropped trash right next to her bucket, not even pausing to say sorry. One of those students was Brandon, talking loudly on his phone. "Dad, don't worry. I'll graduate with honors. Professor Williams is a pushover." Eleanor kept her head down, hiding a small smile. Professor Williams was anything but a pushover. Brandon was in for a rude awakening. James walked by a moment later. Unlike the others, he stopped. "Good morning, Mrs. Jackson," he said quietly, with a respectful nod that acknowledged both her roles, the visible one and the hidden one. Eleanor nodded back. Their shared secret created an unexpected bridge across worlds that rarely connected. In the daytime, she was invisible to most. But night after night, book by book, case by case, she was building a future that would soon step into the light. Spring was in full bloom on the Westfield campus. Only 3 months remained until graduation, and the pressure was building for everyone. Students rushed between classes with dark circles under their eyes, professors posted office hours that stretched into the night, and the library stayed packed until closing time. For Eleanor, the pressure was double. Her final thesis on educational equity and discrimination was due in 2 weeks, and she was still cleaning floors and emptying trash cans for 8 hours each day. Her hands were cracked from the cleaning chemicals, and she'd been getting only 4 hours of sleep most nights. She had just finished mopping the 3rd floor of the business building when she found it, a crude drawing on the student lounge whiteboard. Someone had sketched a caricature of a woman in a janitor's uniform, mop in hand, with an exaggerated sad face. Above it, in large letters, dreaming of being important. Elena stood perfectly still, staring at the drawing. Through the glass doors, she could see Brandon and his friends at a table, pretending not to watch her reaction. One of them whispered something, and the others laughed. For 15 years, Elena had endured small cruelties with quiet dignity. She had focused on her goals, refusing to let the disrespect derail her dreams. But something about this drawing, its deliberate meanness, its attempt to diminish not just her job, but her aspirations, cut deeper than usual. With slow, deliberate movements, Eleanor wiped the whiteboard clean. She could feel Brendan watching, waiting for her to break down or lash out. Instead, she finished her cleaning routine as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, Eleanor was emptying the trash in the administration building. Most of the staff had gone home for the day, but lights still burned in the dean's office. As she approached with her cart, she could hear voices through the partially open door. Richard Whitaker made it very clear, the dean was saying. His donation comes with the expectation that Brandon will be the student speaker at commencement. But his grades are barely above average, replied a woman's voice, the assistant dean. Traditionally, the speaker is chosen based on academic merit. His father sits on the board, the dean explained with a sigh. Sometimes merit isn't everything. Eleanor's hand slipped, and her cleaning supplies clattered to the floor. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. The dean appeared in the doorway, his face flushing when he saw her. "Eleanor, I didn't realize." "It's fine, sir," she said, gathering her supplies. "I'm accustomed to being overlooked." The quiet dignity in her voice made the dean look away first. Eleanor finished cleaning the hallway in silence, but inside, her thoughts were racing. All these years she had played by the rules, worked twice as hard as everyone else, sacrificed sleep and comfort and time with her daughter, all to prove that merit still mattered in this world. Yet here was Brandon, whose only achievement was being born to the right father, about to receive an honor he hadn't earned. That night, Eleanor sat at her small kitchen table surrounded by law books and her nearly completed thesis. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. Her daughter Zoe had taped a calendar to the wall, with graduation day circled in red marker. Eleanor stared at that circle. For years, she had imagined that day, walking across the stage in cap and gown, proving to herself that her dreams weren't too big, that she belonged in those hallowed halls not just with a mop, but with a mind worthy of respect. "Mom?" Zoe's voice came from the hallway. Home from medical school for spring break, Zoe was the reason Eleanor had pushed through every hardship. "You're still up?" "Just finishing some work," Eleanor said, trying to sound normal. Zoe sat beside her mother, noticing the redness around her eyes. "What happened?" Eleanor hesitated, then told her about the drawing, about Brandon, about the dean's conversation. "I'm thinking of not attending my graduation," she admitted. "After all these years, I'm still just the janitor to them." Zoe's eyes flashed with anger. "Mom, no. You've earned this more than any of them. They don't define who you are. You've earned your place there, more than most of them." Eleanor looked at her daughter, strong, brilliant, unafraid. And something shifted inside her. Maybe it wasn't enough to simply earn her degree quietly. Maybe it was time for Eleanor Jackson to be seen. "Maybe it's time they learned that," Eleanor whispered, a new determination in her voice. Eleanor didn't tell anyone about her decision. She simply continued her routine, cleaning during the day, studying at night, but something had changed inside her. She walked a little taller, looked people in the eye more often, and spent extra time polishing her final thesis paper. One evening, Professor Williams caught Eleanor as she was changing out of her uniform. "I've nominated your thesis for the Hampton Award," the professor said, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's the highest honor for a graduating law student." Eleanor stared at her. "But that's usually given to students who show exceptional legal analysis and original thinking," Professor Williams finished for her. "Exactly what your work demonstrates." The Hampton Award was Westfield's most prestigious honor. The winner not only received recognition, but also traditionally delivered the student address at graduation. Eleanor had never even considered herself a candidate. "The selection committee reviews all entries blindly," Professor Williams explained. "They won't know you're the janitor. They'll only see your ideas, your arguments, your voice." For the first time in years, Eleanor let herself hope for something beyond just completing her degree. 2 weeks before graduation, the campus buzzed with excitement. Award announcements were posted on the main bulletin board in the university center, drawing crowds of students eager to see their names. Eleanor was polishing the wooden staircase nearby when she heard Brandon's voice, loud and annoyed. "M. Jackson won the Hampton? Who the hell is that? I've never even heard of this person." Eleanor kept her head down, focusing on a stubborn scuff mark. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. M. Jackson, Eleanor Mary Jackson. Her name was up there among the award winners, but no one had connected it to the woman who cleaned their floors. Probably some scholarship charity case, one of Brandon's friends remarked. They always throw those people a bone. Eleanor's hand tightened around her polishing cloth, but she remained silent. 6 years of hard work reduced to a bone thrown to a charity case. Professor Williams was walking by and stopped when she heard the conversation. Actually, Mr. Whittaker, Ian Jackson has maintained the highest GPA in legal studies for the past 6 years while working full-time. I'd hardly call excellence a bone. Brandon scoffed. 6 years? Who takes that long? Someone who has overcome more obstacles than you've ever faced, the professor replied calmly before walking away. The words hung in the air. For a moment, Brandon looked almost thoughtful, but then he shrugged and walked off with his friends, the moment of reflection gone. That evening, the library was unusually busy. Finals week was approaching, and every table was occupied with stressed students. Elena had taken a short break from cleaning to read a legal journal in a quiet corner. She'd been doing this for years, and most students were too wrapped up in their own work to notice the janitor reading complex legal material. But tonight was different. Brandon and his friends had claimed a large table near where Eleanor sat. They had spread out their books, but were mostly checking their phones and complaining about professors. I still can't believe some nobody got the Hampton Award, Brandon said. My dad donated a wing to this school. Eleanor turned a page in her journal, trying to ignore them. One of Brandon's friends nudged him and nodded toward Eleanor. Look, she's at it again. Reading stuff she probably doesn't understand. Brandon grinned. Hey, Eleanor, plain lawyer again. Shouldn't you be emptying trash somewhere? The library went quiet. Other students looked up, some embarrassed, others curious. For 6 years, Eleanor had avoided confrontation, had kept her head down, had worked in silence. But Professor Williams' words echoed in her mind. Excellence has a way of making itself known. Eleanor closed her book and stood up. She was tired of hiding, tired of being invisible. Actually, Brandon, she said, her voice clear and steady, I'll be receiving my Juris Doctor degree next week, summa cum laude. She met his eyes directly. I'm Ian Jackson. Eleanor Mary Jackson. The silence that followed was absolute. Students at nearby tables stared with open mouths. One girl actually gasped. Brandon's face went from mocking to confused to disbelieving in the span of seconds. That's not possible, he finally managed. Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. Many things seem impossible until they're done, she said quietly. Then she picked up her cleaning cart and walked away, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and whispers that would soon spread across the entire campus. By morning, everyone would know. The woman they had ignored for years, the invisible person who cleaned their messes, was actually the mysterious top law student they had all been wondering about. By breakfast time the next morning, the story had spread across campus like wildfire. Students who had never spoken to Eleanor suddenly noticed her. Some looked away guiltily when she passed. Others stared openly, whispering behind their hands. A few even smiled or nodded, as if they'd always seen her potential. Eleanor continued her work as usual, moving through the halls with the same quiet efficiency she always had. But now she felt eyes following her everywhere. In the cafeteria, conversation stopped when she entered. In the library, students moved aside to let her pass. Is it true? A young woman asked her as Eleanor cleaned a bathroom sink. Are you really the Hampton Award winner? Eleanor just nodded and continued wiping the counter. That's amazing, the student said. I'm struggling just to pass constitutional law, and I don't have a job or anything. For the first time, Eleanor saw respect in the eyes of a student who had probably never really looked at her before. Brandon and his friends, however, didn't take the news so well. As Eleanor wheeled her cart past the student lounge, she overheard them talking. This has to be some kind of affirmative action stunt, Brandon was saying, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. She probably had special help, lower standards. She tutored me through constitutional law when I was failing, came another voice. It was James Chen, who rarely spoke up in groups. She's brilliant. And she did it while cleaning up your messes. Come on, James, Brandon scoffed. You're telling me the woman who mops the floors understands complex legal theory better than people who've been preparing for law school their whole lives? Yes, James said simply. That's exactly what I'm telling you. The room went quiet. Elena moved on, but she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. Someone had stood up for her, had seen her for who she truly was. That afternoon, the student newspaper released a special edition. The headline read, "The Invisible Scholar: How Westfield's Janitor Became Its Top Law Student." The article detailed Eleanor's journey, how she had lost her husband to cancer 12 years ago, raised her daughter alone, worked nights as a janitor while taking care of her ailing mother, and still managed to pursue her education one course at a time. Students were reading the paper everywhere Eleanor looked. Some looked shocked, others moved. A group of young women from the law school actually applauded when she walked by. Mrs. Jackson, one of them, called out, "Would you mind if I interviewed you for the law review? Your thesis on educational equity is exactly what we're focusing on this semester." Before Eleanor could answer, she spotted a commotion at the main entrance. A sleek black car had pulled up, and a man in an expensive suit was striding toward the administration building. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the resemblance to Brandon, the same confident walk, the same set of the shoulders. Richard Whittaker Sr. had arrived on campus, and he didn't look happy. Eleanor continued her cleaning routine, but kept one eye on the administration building. Through the glass doors, she could see Brandon and his father arguing with Dean Harris. Though she couldn't hear the words, the body language told the story. Richard Whittaker pointing his finger, Brandon's face flushed with embarrassment, the dean looking increasingly uncomfortable. Later, as Eleanor was finishing her shift, Dean Harris approached her in the hallway. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, his voice formal. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Eleanor followed him to his office, where Brandon and his father waited. Richard Whittaker Sr. assessed her coldly, taking in her janitor's uniform and worn shoes. "Mr. Whittaker has expressed some concerns about the commencement ceremony," the dean explained awkwardly. "The Hampton Award winner traditionally delivers the student address," Richard Whittaker said. "But given your unusual situation, perhaps we should make an exception this year." "My unusual situation?" Eleanor asked quietly. "You're the janitor," Brandon blurted out. "People are going to think this is some kind of joke." "Mr. Whittaker has been very generous to this university," the dean added weakly. "His son has been preparing his speech for months." Eleanor stood perfectly still, looking at these men who still couldn't see past her uniform even now. Then she noticed something in Richard Whittaker's expression, a flicker of recognition, quickly hidden. "Wait," Richard said suddenly, studying her face. "Mary? Eleanor Marie from Westside High?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "It's been a long time, Richard." "You two know each other?" Brandon asked, confused. "Your father and I were in the same class," Eleanor explained, "before my family moved to the east side of town." What she didn't add was that Richard Whittaker Sr. had been one of the students who had tormented her after she received a scholarship to their affluent high school. History had repeated itself a generation later. The color drained from Richard's face as the memories returned. For a moment, the powerful businessman looked like the teenager he had once been, caught in an act of cruelty. "I didn't realize," he began, then stopped. For once, Richard Whittaker seemed at a loss for words. Graduation day dawned bright and clear. The sky was a perfect blue, with just a few white clouds drifting lazily overhead. Westfield's great lawn had been transformed overnight. Hundreds of white chairs arranged in neat rows, a stage decorated with flowers and the university banner, and a podium polished to a high shine. Eleanor stood in the bathroom of her small apartment, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized herself in the black graduation robe and cap. For so many years, she had seen herself only in her janitor's uniform, the invisible woman with the mop and bucket. Today, for the first time, she would be seen for who she truly was. "Mom," Zoe called from the living room. "We need to leave soon." Eleanor took a deep breath and joined her daughter. Zoe's eyes filled with tears when she saw her mother in full graduation regalia. "You look perfect," Zoe said, straightening Eleanor's cap. "Dad would have been so proud today." Eleanor thought of her late husband, who had always believed in her dreams, even when they seemed impossible. "He's watching," she said softly. When they arrived at campus, the transformation was even more striking. The same halls that Eleanor had cleaned for 15 years were now decorated with flowers and banners. The same floors she had mopped were now covered with red carpet, and the people who had walked past her without seeing her were now smiling, nodding, even stopping to congratulate her. As Eleanor took her place among the law graduates, she felt oddly calm. The past week had been a whirlwind, news reporters calling for interviews, law firms suddenly interested in her unique perspective, and the dean fumbling through an awkward apology for any misunderstandings. After the confrontation in his office, Richard Whittaker Sr. had left campus without another word. The next day, the dean had announced that there would be 2 student speakers at graduation, Brandon Whittaker representing the business school, and Eleanor Jackson, the Hampton Award recipient from the law school. Now, as the ceremony began, Eleanor searched the crowd for her daughter. Zoe sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside her were faces Eleanor hadn't expected to see: the cafeteria workers who had slipped her extra food on long nights, the maintenance staff who had covered her sections when she needed to study, the night guards who had kept her secret for years. They had come to witness her moment, dressed in their Sunday best. The president of the university welcomed everyone, his voice booming across the lawn. Awards were presented, honorary degrees bestowed. Then it was time for the student addresses. Brandon went first. He approached the podium stiffly, his prepared speech in hand. As he began to speak about privilege and opportunity, something unusual happened. His rehearsed words seemed to stick in his throat. He looked up from his paper, scanning the crowd, then looked directly at Eleanor. "I've been given every advantage," he said, his voice softer than usual. "And I've often failed to see the privileges that made my journey easier. My father's connections, my family's wealth, even the color of my skin. These things opened doors for me that remained closed to others." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the speech anyone had expected from Brandon Whittaker. "Today, I'm humbled to share the stage with someone who reminds us all what true merit looks like," he concluded. "Someone who cleaned our classrooms by day and outshined us in them by night." Then it was Eleanor's turn. As she rose and walked to the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. Many of the professors were seeing Eleanor in something other than a janitor's uniform for the first time. Some of the students were finally looking at her, really looking at her, after years of seeing through her. 15 years ago, I walked through these gates with a mop and bucket," Eleanor began, her voice clear and strong. "Today, I walk out with a law degree. Some might call my journey inspiring, but I call it necessary. Necessary because education should never be a privilege for the few, but a right for all who are willing to work for it." She looked out at the crowd, at the sea of faces turned toward her. "To those who never saw me, I saw you. I cleaned your classrooms, but I also learned in them. I emptied your trash, but I also filled my mind. I was invisible to you, but I always saw my own worth." In the audience, several students looked down, their faces flushed with shame. Others nodded, their eyes bright with tears. "Today is not a victory over anyone," Eleanor continued. "It's simply the fulfillment of a promise I made to myself and my daughter that our circumstances would never define our possibilities." The applause began slowly, then built to a thunderous standing ovation. The kitchen staff and maintenance workers were the first on their feet, followed by the faculty, then the students, until the entire assembly was standing. After the ceremony, as graduates and families mingled on the lawn, Eleanor felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a distinguished woman in a tailored suit. "Ms. Jackson? I'm Patricia Reynolds from the Equal Education Initiative. We've read your thesis on educational equity, and we'd like to offer you a position as our legal counsel." Before Eleanor could respond, another figure approached, Richard Whittaker Sr., looking uncomfortable in the bright sunlight. "Ms. Jackson," he said formally, "I owe you an apology, one that's 30 years overdue." Eleanor looked at the man who had once made her feel small, both as a teenager and just days ago in the dean's office. "Keep it, Richard," she said gently. "Instead, make a donation to the Staff Education Fund. Help someone else become visible." Then she turned away, toward her future, her head held high, no longer invisible, no longer silent, but finally and fully seen.